So then fam, the console wars may very well be over. Yay! Now we can actually have proper gaming discussions rather than this tit for tat back and forth of my plastic box is better than your plastic box. It's like, yeah, okay, I'm a PlayStation guy. I prefer PlayStation, but I've never had a problem with Xbox. Xbox is fine and groovy. Nintendo is fine and groovy. PC is fine and groovy. Where the conversation needs to take now is, considering that Sony basically seems to have won the console war more or less by default, then we need to evolve the conversation, and that's what this channel is about. The conversation, is it not? Among other things, but primarily the conversation. So, in this video I want to discuss and obviously get your feedback down below, typey. Who has had the biggest impact on gaming and still continues to have the biggest impact on gaming? One may have had it in the past, one may have it now. I mean, you could say that PlayStation has had the biggest impact because they truly made the 3D gaming system idea work. Because, others had tried it. I mean, we all saw how it all began with in the early days of the PlayStation, when it was all the various systems that were out then, and they're all relics now, and only the PlayStation is really considered to be a retro console of high regard. And then of course PS2 came out and was amazing, and it's still like the best selling console of all time. And of course Sony first party studios bringing out just literally decades of amazing software. And that's just been a long thing. And it's interesting because then you could also say, well, that's a similar story to Nintendo. Nintendo has brought out incredible machine after incredible machine for the technological limits of the time, and their first party software library, each one of those points in time has been of extraordinarily high quality. Some of it may have been a bit kiddie, but nonetheless quality. But then you could argue that Microsoft really pushed things forward because they came up against Sony and went, yeah, you are not going to have whole run of the thing. We're this giant, billion-dollar corporation. We're going to come in here and go, this is how it's going, and we're going to show you. So then Sony had to battle against that, and then the two basically had to try and outdo each other the whole time in technical specifications, in gameplay ideas, in creativity, in story focus, in game focus, in types of games they're making, one being more online, one being more single player, although both doing what each other does in certain respects. Much like it was with Sega and Nintendo. And Sega can't be discounted in the things that they've done. I mean, Sega's influence has been felt over decades as well. In-flight gaming, that you got Sega to thank for that. A lot of stuff that happened in the arcades in the 80s and the 90s, you got Sega to thank for that. I mean, it's Sega that brought about so many of the really incredible arcade games that we now consider to be household classics. I mean, Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi, to name just a couple. The list is almost endless of Sega games and Sega owned properties. And Sega really pushed handhelds forward when they came out with the Sega Game Gear. Well, the Sega Game Gear was far more advanced than the Nintendo Game Boy, but the Nintendo Game Boy was first. But then obviously You know, Sony came out with the PSP and then eventually the PlayStation Vita, and as someone that's owned both of those, I can tell you they were both amazing machines in their own right. In fact, if anything, I have said in videos gone by in the early days of the channel about how the Vita basically was a missed opportunity because it was such a capable machine that if they hadn't done all this silly stuff with the proprietary cabling and memory cards and stuff, then that system could have really just rocketed. And I mean rocketed. But then, you know, there are other companies that have come along and done other things, and you talk about PC and where that stands in gaming. But then PC is more just a platform than a movement of software and of development identity. But then PC did move the goalpost, because when was the last time you bought a physical PC game? So PC brought about the idea of an all digital gaming landscape, for good or for ill. Or you could even say that the arcade is the most influential part of gaming, because that's what got most people to actually go and play video games in the first place. And some of the most interesting games that came to the beginning of what we now think of as modern gaming came about, even though what we now think of as modern gaming is also retro, because so many of those incredible arcade games that I spoke of earlier, Tekken, Soul Blade, Ridge Racer, they were all on the PlayStation. That first little grey box held those games, and the versions they had of those games on that little box were far more than people back then were ever expecting to get. And when I saw Ridge Racer and I saw Tekken on the PlayStation, I knew that's what I wanted. And when I eventually got my PlayStation, that's the games I got with it. Luckily enough, those were the two games that my sister's boyfriend of that period had bought with that system when I bought it off him for 85 quid a year after release. I still can't believe how much I lucked out on that. But you can toss this about all day and all night, but really what I want is for your thoughts down there. Tell me, make cases, you know, really flesh out your arguments. Go 120 word essay if you like. I know that Mark Goes Blind Gaming will do that. So yeah, tell me in your honest opinion, without console buys, now the console wars are basically over, because, you know, I think it's fair to say that Sony has won, if in some ways by default. The console wars are over, so who has had and who is having the biggest impact on gaming? Interesting question, and I'd love to read your responses below. Hashtag support Scottish YouTubers, and of course, as always, nae bother.